Hey everybody, it's Ryan Maloney here from the National Jazz Museum in Harlem. Excited that you've joined us this evening for the kickoff of our Jazz and Dance series that we're running this spring from the National Jazz Museum in Harlem. And on behalf of our executive director, Tracy Hyder-Suffren, along with Christian McBride and John Batiste, who are our creative directors, we want to welcome you and thank you for tuning in. So we have a four-part series. We'll be looking at how jazz and dance has intersected over the last 100 years and how it lives in our world today. To kick things off, we're presenting a program, Swingin in Time, Dancers and Musicians, Perpetual Negotiation of Time and Space. This is a really exciting one where we're going to dig into the not only the past and the emergence of jazz and the dance that went along with it, but how that functions in our world today. Our hosts and presenters for this evening, two incredible dancers and scholars and educators, LaTasha Barnes and Christi J. Wells. So I'm going to pass it on to them. Thank you guys so much for joining us. Please click that share button. And if you want more information on our events, visit www.jmih.org/events. All right.
Welcome, welcome, welcome. Thank you all so much for joining us today. Happy to be here with my great friend, Dr. Christi J. Wells. Hi, Dr. Christi J.
And I am happy to be here with my great friend, the incredible LaTasha Barnes. Pleasure to see you.
It's been so long since I've seen you. Was it 30 minutes? Yeah. It's been really a great pleasure to build this presentation and to kind of suss out our feelings about this topic. And we really want to thank the National Jazz Museum in Harlem for this opportunity as well. Our presentation for you today, Swinging in Time, was born out of Christi J and my collaborative conversations about our observations through our own research, as well as our personal experiences. Christi J as a musicologist, myself as an ethnochoreologist, and both of us as jazz lovers and dancers. In my efforts to continue to be in service to my communities as a tradition bearer of Black American dance forms, this notion of the negotiation of time and space has been something that's continually rebounded, which is something that we'll talk about as well in our movement and music explorations, and brought back this sense of understanding of how the continuum is actually formed and its purpose. And so when the National Jazz Museum approached us with wanting to present our understandings and research about partner dances and the musics that inspired them from the 1800s to now, we were really, really excited and honored to do that. Christi J, I don't know if you had anything else.
And I need to jump in and make clear that when the National Jazz Museum in Harlem approached me with the opportunity to collaborate with LaTasha Barnes, I would have done a backflip if my knees were in the place to do so, because I've been an admirer of you and your practice and your work for quite a while, and it's been a very special experience getting to build this together and seeing both the different angles that we come at this from, but also the really strong shared points of resonance, both around values and missions and multiple perspectives that we have tried to synthesize into this presentation for sure.
Yeah, and speaking to that, while we are both humbly and gratefully deeply educated academically in a lot of these things, like I said, we are speaking both from our personal perspectives, and in interest of that, because of recording and publishing rights and all of these things, much of the footage that you'll see are either of myself performing or groups that I am in participation with or co-organizing or directing, just to navigate those situations and not to encroach upon someone not wanting to be shared in this capacity. But we will name many, many other artists who are living in these practices and moving these things forward in the ways that we're going to share with you today. So we're definitely not the be all end all authorities on these things. We just love it and are really honored to have the opportunity to share our perspectives about these things. So
absolutely, and I think that you'll see that theme in what we're talking about as this presentation, as we are giving it, as it has been the entire time we have worked on it, is always in process and in motion, just as culture, as music, as dance and art are always in process and in motion. So there is a rejection of clean linearity that you will see both in the stories that we present, the practices we present, and in the ways that we frame them, and just the approach that we take to this conversation.
Very much so. As we were joking before, a lot of things you'll hear restated, reiterated, reformed, repackaged, reimagined, and that is what we both accept and agree in many different ways, and sometimes different language, that the continuum, and as I love to refer to it, and many other scholars as well, the Black dance continuum and the Black music and art continuum has manifested and continues to do so, are by these notions of reimagining and representing of the great, beautiful, amazing, powerful art that those who came before us have created and left for us to use.
As you will see, the brilliant Black musicians and dancers whose work we are featuring, repackaging, restating, reiterating across time and space and across generations, practices that both call back to the before and call forward to the future and live dynamically in the present.
And so we'll try our best not to wax super poetic about a lot of these things. No, we're probably going to wax.
Yeah, a little bit.
But digging into this, we're going to start with just to frame a bit of the synthesis for all of you in real time. My personal practice when I started, this was about 2016 when I was maybe 3 or 4 years into my jazz journey of reclaiming, I'll say from my personal experience, the knowledge, traditions, and applications of jazz, vernacular jazz, original jazz, as I like to assert in academic spaces, in all spaces, actually. But this presentation, it's labeled as a mashup, because that was just the sexy thing to call it at the time. But it really is a meditative exploration of my negotiations internally with hip hop, house, a little bit of whacking, and jazz, as I was starting to begin to hold it more clearly in a container within my movement vocabulary. And we want to start with this just to give a little life to where this conversation is going to go.
If that isn't something for you, that ass. In this setting, she will be recasting the various shapes, rhythms, and expressions to further highlight each dance style's roots and their connections to one another. Please welcome LaTasha Barnes.
Let's go.
Yay!
Yay, indeed. Do my applause reaction, very merited. It's incredible.
Well, thank you for that. Well, why we chose to start with my interpretation and my personal practice, of course, we shared a little bit the legal ramifications of that already, but we wanted to expand our current notions of partner dancing and what exactly that is. And while we hear partner dancing, and we do often express it as being physically connected one person to another, we wanted to also share that your partnerships are not necessarily just with another human in physical form. It could be with maybe a group of 12 humans as a band. That notion of partnering is also very important and very, very generative to the Black continuum and how it's managed to survive through all of these generations, and how it's also managed to create and produce such incredible work across so many generations.
Absolutely. And some things I see in there, you're reminding me of a moment that I really caught myself when I was writing my dissertation. And I'd been for a while talking about the connection between music and movement as a way to talk about the connection between music and dance. And I had this light bulb moment where I realized the obvious, that music is also a movement practice, that music is also a highly skilled, highly cultivated, culturally situated, intergenerational movement practice. So when we talk about partnership between one and one's dance partner, that can be two people who are engaging in what we might call a couples dance, that can be a kinesthetic partnership between one or more dancers and musicians who are sharing a kinesthetic language that is expressed to and for different senses. And I know that in the time that I've danced Lindy Hop, I've heard a lot of talk about the idea of that it's a dance between you and your partner and everyone else who's on the floor and the physical space itself and the musicians who are performing. And then in your performance, what I also saw is intergenerational partnership, right? Because you're quoting and shouting out steps to and from the ancestors, right? With
Absolutely.
those quotations of the shim sham, fall off the logs, and all of the vocabulary that's in there as well.
And quotations of Norma Miller's Trickeration, like many things that were seated within there that, as we were talking about, this swinging through time, which also, and again, as I said, we'll keep touching back on several themes and theories and notions, but brings to mind the notion of Sankofa, which we talk about in Black cultural traditions, to go back and get what's important, for a more modern way of saying it, I guess we would say. But it really does talk about this swing, this essence, this element of swinging through the beings and their stories that are held by this music and this movement, and purposefully bringing it forward to inform and reshape what we're doing today, and to inform new generations that this is available to them as well. But then also to swing back in time with what we carry now, to elevate and boost a little bit of their story and their experiences through movement. But that it's just such a powerful, it's a powerful thing to live. It's a powerful thing to engage and research, and it's a very powerful thing to have a relationship with. And I know we've spoken about this a lot in the terms of our teaching. You can hold information and knowledge and things like this, but having a relationship with it is something different. And this is that negotiation that we're talking about, specifically with these partner dance forms, from swing to house. So we started with this second line, I guess you would say, inspiration of music, because for me at that time, it was something that straddled kind of both my, excuse me, both my listening perspective, my temporal focuses, if we want to call it that, of the sound of the fourth floor on house, and then the swung rhythms of big band jazz. And for me, second line just sat across them so beautifully and allowed me space to move in between the styles. And that was something that kicked off my academic research was recognizing that this physicalization was real for me. And if it was that real for me, it had to be real for other artists. That informed the things that I was doing. And I knew from watching my family dance as I grew up in partnered settings and having learned, Lindy Hop at a very, very young age. Of course, she didn't call it Lindy Hop. She just said the dancing that they did from my great grandmother. I knew it had to be something real. This understanding, this connectedness had to be a very real thing, not just for my family, but for the people that they came from too. And so speaking to that, that's how, for me personally, in my own lived experience, we get to a space where even in our own negotiations, we're traversing these social spaces, these competitive spaces, performative spaces, academic spaces with these art forms. So quite literally, as they embody swing, they give us permission to swing through all of the different facets of ourselves and the spaces that this music and movement exists. So I'm deeply grateful again to the ancestors for creating these amazing things for us to be able to reside in and to live from. So.
And what you just said speaks to, I think, another one of the terms we're setting for what we're talking about today. We were asked not only to talk about partner dancing, but we're also going to be complicating this notion of a social dance, applying a framework that I first encountered in a co-authored piece by Terry Monahan and Karen Hubbard, where they were breaking the Lindy Hop down into its social competition and performance formats, and talking about the fluidity and interdependence of those different spaces of dance, which a number of Lindy Hop dancers and dancers in other jazz dance and more broadly in Black dance traditions have talked about are the fluidity in the ways that social competition and performance spheres have distinct elements, but also lean upon, feed, and fluidly circulate with each other. So we're going to be showing some social footage and talking about social practices. We're going to be talking about versions that might be shown in professional performance or things that might happen during a competitive setting. And we just want to make clear that these are all dynamically fluid parts of a continuum that speak to each other.
And to touch back really quickly too, with regards to what we're going to be sharing, we did say we're expanding your notions of what partner dancing is, but also that we both very, very deeply believe and abide by the principle that and I don't want to say better as in terms of good, but the more in tune of a social dancer that you are also very, very much contributes to how you share with another person and also how you share with your community, which are the levels of partnership that we're talking about. So individual partnership, you with the music, you with yourself, it's a relationship a lot of us need to work on, as well as you with the music and you with the form, you with the dance style, and how those things negotiate one with the other. So just want to add that too.
Absolutely. I think this is a good moment to bring in some language from two really brilliant scholars, both quotations that you introduced me to. And the first is from Fred Moten, and it is, quote, "I'm interested in the convergence of Blackness and the irreducible sound of necessarily visible performance at the scene of objection." And I'm going to read some beautiful words from another of my favorite scholars, LaTasha Barnes, who talks about the pleasure of finding the space, the ecstatic moment that generates a rhythm in the middle of this phrase. So reading those two quotes together, I was wondering if you could talk a little bit about how those words intersect with your practice, with the video we just saw, and how you come at this material and this tradition.
Well, for me, it really, it goes into so many different veins of who I am and how I think, and the work and the scholars and the artists that I've been able to be in conversation with. I'll say either through their work or actually personally. And I say the pleasure of finding the space, but it's not necessarily just like a physical space. It's a spiritual space. It's a knowledge space. But for whatever reason, and some people love to say that it is inherent in Black traditions and Black artists, but I'm always looking for the silence to find a space to add my understanding, and not just to insert myself in what I feel I know, but to contribute to it. So it is that negotiation of, oh, there's silence. Do I have something that actually is worthwhile to share in this moment that's going to add to this experience? It's going to make this a richer experience for others who are participating in this as well. And for me, engaging with Fred Moten's work was something that really gave me permission to honor that desire in myself, and that desire that I felt in other representations of Blackness in the music, in the dance, and not to just see it as this hoity-toity, collection of words that were meant to say something esoteric, but to really signify that it's at these points of objection and questioning and negotiation that we do see and find the deepest and richest beauty. And for me, discovering the missing bits, the space that jazz should have been occupying in my dance and music education, really was so overwhelming and so satisfying, and made me want to dig deeper and learn more about it, not just so that I could have it, but so that it could inform future moments of negotiation and understanding that I would have something to gird myself with in order to push forward. And I think one of the things too, of course, during this time, I've been able to think a lot. I think one of the other things as well that comes up for me with this was the importance of the music to the generation of the art. And not generation as in people generation, but generating of the art, the producing of the art. And when I first encountered the story of James Reese Europe and how their music and their practices and their insistences of their excellence and their space to do their thing, really, it really struck me that it was, again, a continuing tradition. They tell you that everything you did has already been done, but just to see it and hear it, and to hear other people's interpretations of it also was really, really powerful.
Absolutely. So let's talk a little bit about James Reese Europe. And so he was an incredibly important musician, culture bearer, soldier, artist, activist, entrepreneur, an organizer.
Yeah.
So he was born in Mobile, Alabama in the 19th century, raised in Washington, D.C., I believe after the age of 10, moves to New York City in 1904, and around 1910, he starts this organization, the Clef Club, which is kind of both a de facto musicians union at a time when, of course, when Black people, as they were and still are excluded from official, whether government run or otherwise civic run spaces of support. Mm-hmm. Black communities will rally and create their own structures and spaces. Exactly, and that is exactly what James Reese Europe did, and we can talk a little bit more about the specifics of that organization and the work that it did in a bit. But the ensemble that came out of that, the Clef Club Orchestra, performed notably at Carnegie Hall years prior to Paul Whiteman's famous performance. So I think it's really important to talk about James Reese Europe, the music that he and his orchestra created, and let's listen to a little bit of it, and then we can talk about it. So we're going to listen to a bit of a recording of Memphis Blues, and there are a couple of really interesting ways that within the format of arranged march music, it integrates aspects of blues and ragtime at the level of phrasing, at the level of melody, at the level of form, to name just a few. So let's enjoy some of that.
So good.
So I've been,
So good.
yeah, it's wonderful. And in preparing this, I've really enjoyed getting to listen to it repeatedly and develop a stronger relationship with his music and with this piece. So let me ask you first, what are you hearing in there? What are you hearing and feeling
Oh,
in this
goodness.
recording of Memphis Blues?
Well, I hear a lot of call and response, a lot of lilts,
Mm-hmm.
a lot of runs, and that would translate for me to be like literally movement that just continues on and on and on in one direction and then finds itself flowing in another direction, and that would be from a dancer's perspective. So for me, I hear as well the rhythms that I could see or visualize from footage of the Texas Tommy being danced.
Mm-hmm.
And I'm not sure if we actually put that footage. I think we meant to, but I don't
No,
know.
I've got it.
Oh, yay. And so if we could play that really quickly, because in hearing that song, I see that dancing.
Absolutely. So I'm going to show some footage from San Francisco from 1910 of the Texas Tommy.
It's just looking at this, I can absolutely hear James Reese Jervis's song over this. Like that would be, I think, something that you would dance to Texas Tommy to. Exactly. Yeah. And so for me, a lot of the conversations, a lot of the things that I'm going to be sharing throughout this conversation are going to be more from a movement translation perspective, what I see and what I feel and what I hear and what it connects to for me. Yeah. Do you have any other things to add to that?
Yeah, I wanted to say a little bit more about a couple of the interesting things that I hear happening with the blues in that recording. And so I'll get into a little bit of technical language. I don't mean for that to be alienating to anyone who's listening to this. So if you don't know exactly what an A section is or a B section, don't worry about it so much. But generally, blues music, as it became, there's wide variance in blues music, but as it became solidified into a commercial popular genre for sheet music from W.C. Handy and others, and then ultimately for recordings, including Mamie Smith's Crazy Blues, which sold 1 million copies and started this huge drive for commercially recorded blues songs in the 1920s. Blues music kind of consolidated into a regular format of 12 bars featuring an A section, a repetition of that A section, and then a B section. So you think about lyrics like, "My man don't love me, treats me awful mean." That would be one A section. "My man, he don't love me, treats me awful mean" would be another A section. And then we'd get a B section. "He's the lowest man I've ever seen." And we could, and there are different kinds of variations on that, but that's a rough basic format. And often there's a vocal call and then an instrumental response, or sometimes a call from one instrument and a response from another within each of those 4-bar groupings within the 12 bars. So within the A, within the next A, within the B. And at the very beginning, we hear what sounds to me like that first A section of a blues song. And then we get a little march music. My oral point of reference would be John Philip Sousa for it, but I don't want to take away from Europe being his own composer and having his own innovations. But putting in a kind of march music bridge, but then having another A section and a B section. So it's 16 bars, but there's a 12-bar blues in there with a little bit of interpolation from another genre just at the very beginning. And then here's the bridge. back to the blues. And then they go and do some other things with that for a while. but they do ultimately go back to this blues form and this blues structure, where suddenly we've got a more complex thing happening, but that basic theme comes back, that ba 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 da dee dee da da da, and then all of a sudden in that second A section, now we're getting a 2-bar break in the middle. So on bars 7 and 8, we're getting a 2-bar break, and then it's resolving. So this does ultimately consolidate into a series of 12-bar phrases. And maintains that blues structure for the whole second half of the tune.
And it's really fascinating and really beautiful, like how James Resherp was able to craft this and to present this to folks in such a way that, and I say in such a way that it just was presented with great ease, which is one of the traits that academics like to ascribe to the Africanist aesthetic. But also we know from our conversations, just a little bit problematic, just referring to things as cool and easy in terms of Black art and Black creativity, because it takes away the actual work that was done to learn and develop the skills to produce these things. So while it is, and hearing, effortless and really beautiful and amazing, the fact that he did this on purpose, I think, is the thing that does need to be noted. And that carried over to the artistry that accompanied this music as well. And one of the things that I found most fascinating in my research was seeing the little clip of Europe's musicians dancing. And of course, because, I know you're probably wondering, like, why are we talking about all this music in depth and this one particular guy and these just different understandings of this one moment? Because for me and for Christi J as well, this is kind of a launching point. It's almost a Big Bang moment for those who subscribe to theories of evolution, where you can really get a tangible sense of how these things were coalescing. Sometimes we say an amalgam. Some say, what's the word that you love to use to describe that?
A syncretism.
A syncretism of styles and understandings. Either way, they're all just meant to denote this tangible moment of finding the space to make something new and to generate something new. And so it's beautiful to me to see, as we all know, as Christi J was sharing before, music itself is a movement practice. So it's not unusual that those who produce the music would also move to it and inspire other movers who maybe don't create music to move to it as well. So this little clip of one of Europe's musicians dancing, I really love.
Absolutely. And this footage is from Ken Burns's multi-part documentary film series, Jazz.
With a soul-rousing crash of cymbals, cornet and clarinet players began to manipulate notes in that typical rhythm which no artist has ever put down on paper. Then, as the drummers struck their stride, their shoulders shaking in time, the audience could stand it no longer. The jazz germ hit them, and it seemed to find the vital spot, loosening all muscles and causing what is known in American as an eagle rocking it. And I am satisfied that American music will one day be the world's music. Private Noble Sissel.
French and British band leaders were convinced that Europe's men were using trick instruments. Otherwise, they said, such sounds were not possible.
Every time I see that, I just imagine myself cutting the rug. I'm like, yay, let's go.
And I think
that shuffle step, and that was the Memphis Blues that was playing in that clip as well.
Yes.
And for me, it is the intake or the memory of that shuffle step. Got, to that, that does make me see also that moment in Texas Tommy. And so I immediately refer this individual dancing to this partner dancing. And I hope that this is something that will start to make sense for everybody as you continue this journey with us.
Absolutely. And by holding that footage over a second or two, suddenly we see some bombs dropping. So it's worth noting that that footage was shot overseas in Europe while James Reese Europe was leading the regiment band for the Harlem Hellfighters, or the 369th Infantry Unit during World War I. And I know, LaTasha, you have a history of military service as well. So I was wondering if you wanted to talk about your connection with James Reese Europe, with these musicians and dancers, as we saw on that level as well.
Yeah, it was fascinating as I mentioned, coming to this place of realizing that jazz was missing from my life and the connection to it was missing. Recognizing that much of it came out of marching band traditions and things like this really was a deeper point of connection for me and gave me a bit deeper of a sense of responsibility to it, because the other traditions of discipline and service and security, securing and preserving was something else that I came from. So it was really striking to me that James Reese Europe's story, as well as the story of their dancers being within the military service, not just being soldiers as they were trying to be presented, but they really were multifaceted, multi-perspectived individuals. And again, that was something else, like Fred Moten's work and my mentor, Dr. Deb Willis's work with Black Body in the Lens and the notions of looking, that gave me permission to see not just myself in a different way, but the art that I carried and the stories carried within that I carried. So it was a special point of connection for me to note that it was steeped in such a deep military tradition as well. And not that that's not without its issues and challenges, but it was just a point of personal celebration and connection for me. So
absolutely. And I think when we tell stories, we sometimes silo people into just the one space we see them. Someone's just a dancer or just a musician or hasn't lived this whole life
or
before, after. I'm sorry?
Or just a scholar.
Right, or just a scholar, or just a soldier, or all of these things. And one thing that I think is so important about James Reese Europe and his story is how many lives he touched, and in how many ways, and the kinds of collaboration he did, and how broad and sweeping his own practice was, while still being really while still being contiguous and cohesive in his own adherence to his values and his stated commitment to share the music of his race, of his people, with the world. And people often talk about, in terms of dance, he's always mentioned in the same breath as Vernon and Irene Castle, who were white dancers who were very famous and did a lot of touring. But less discussed and less well known are Johnny Peters and Ethel Williams, who were two very important practitioners of the Texas Tommy, who were from San Francisco, brought that dance to Harlem. And Noble Sissle, in his recollections of his time, Noble Sissle, of course, one of the co-writers with U.B. Blake of the incredibly important Broadway show Shuffle Along.
And as we heard, he was also one of the privates in Europe's band. Yeah.
Yes, he was. So he has a whole long account held by the Library of Congress of his military service with James Reese Europe. That's really fascinating to read. And but he also credits Williams and Peters for introducing this dance in Harlem, and then also on the stage. And again, taking a social practice and turning it into a performance and stage oriented practice.
And for those who dig more into the academic aspects of these things, there's also the text Babylon Girls that touches a little bit on Ethel Williams' contribution to that production as well.
Absolutely.
And how in the beginnings of all of these vaudeville shows and productions and things, that they were setting the stage literally for all of the ways that we celebrate and perform dance and music practices today. So
yes,
definitely look into this too.
Babylon Girls, an incredibly important book by the brilliant Jana Brown. So I very much recommend everyone check that out. It's been a huge influence on my work as well. And when we talk about James Reese Europe and we talk about this idea of negotiating space and how music can provide space for dancers to do their thing, this also, of course, corresponds to people needing space to live their lives healthfully, productively, safely, and in prosperity. And this was a huge priority for James Reese Europe as well, because he was deeply concerned about bodies in his community in terms of just people's material well-being and needs, because he was critically important in his role as an impresario, as an entrepreneur, community organizer. And this really hit home for me many years ago when I had the honor to share a green room and then a stage for a panel about James Reese Europe with the late jazz master Randy Weston, who grew up in Brooklyn and really talked about how he learned from Max Roach how James Reese Europe was the real model economically, financially for Black-owned, Black-run music making, for organizing bands, for making sure people get paid, for making sure people have dignity, all of that kind of stuff. So like I said, he started the Clef Club. It was part booking agency, part de facto musicians union. And this was responsible for dramatically raising wages and improving conditions for Black musicians working in Harlem, in New York City, and then that spread more broadly. And one of the things that I think is really important is that he insisted that when you were hiring Clef Club musicians, you were hiring them exclusively to play music. There had been this expectation that when white society parties hired Black orchestras, they were also hiring people to bus tables during band breaks or otherwise be the help. And Europe made it clear that you were hiring highly skilled professional artists to do their professional work as musicians. You were not hiring them to be the hired help for any needs
and
one might have at the time.
That is forward, as we're going to continue to do through this entire conversation. Another impresario that maybe isn't as well known outside of the current Lindy Hop community, but Herbert White, who actually was also a reflection of this same notion of advocacy for one's artistry and professionalism in your skill, developed the Whitey's Lindy Hoppers out of the Savoy Ballroom, and also I won't mention their union organization, but also made a pathway to ensure that they were paid equitably and that they were celebrated as they should for the skills that they carried. And they were a formidable squadron of elite movers and dancers who created not just together, but alongside the band and the Savoy. And of course, as we were talking about the Savoy is just the most popular. There were many other ballrooms and spaces where this was happening, and they also had their own teams and their impresarios for each ballroom that were overseeing the dance squadrons and things like this. But I really just want, and I know Christi J as well, we really just want to make it known that this tradition of those realizing that they have the knowledge and wherewithal to help others understand how they can better advocate for themselves and produce and present art that means something to them, but also make sure that they're compensated for it in a way that helps them to sustain their lives and their art, is a perpetuating tradition, and one that I'm honored to be a part of as well. But back to the Lindy Hop, because we're moving forward from James Reese Europe and March.
Well, if we can, before we move off of James Reese Europe, I do think it's important that we talk about the way that negotiation can often be very complex for Black performers engaging in a white supremacist culture with white dominant spaces, and there can be a challenging negotiation of conditions of possibility that James Reese Europe and his musicians did certainly face, because James Reese Europe, on the one hand, very much pushed for music reading in the sense of Western notational literacy among musicians who worked for the Clef Club, and musicians were either already able to read sheet music, or he pushed for that to be the case. But at the same time, sometimes he asked his groups to memorize their music so that when they went on the gig for a white audience, they could pretend to be orally trained musicians and fit into this white stereotype of Black music making, of Black creativity, as natural and instinctive rather than highly cultivated, trained, and skilled.
And it's funny, I said moving forward, but we're actually talking about the same thing.
Yeah.
Just in maybe a few years gap difference. But this was the same for the dancers of the Savoy as well, being presented as just effortless and natural and wild and raw in their articulations of dance to music. But in actuality, they were deeply skilled and trained and intentional about their movement and how they employed it. So yeah, and I think we have a great point of intersection from scholar Jackie Malone.
Yes.
With regard to this notion across musicianship and danceship, if we want to call it that. And this is from her book, Stepping on the Blues. And it notes Black youth and adults generally don't take classes to learn socially. They're academies and dance halls, house parties, social clubs, and the streets. That's where we learn. In fact, formal dance studios are usually years behind the real source of America's social dances, the Black community. And subnote from myself, and often exclude Black artists and dancers from those spaces, but bring the art. It's a whole other conversation. Jackie goes on to say, training in this context is informal, but it is training nevertheless, because the training is so subtle, the outcome often seems like second nature, i.e. my great-grandmother talking to me about the dances that she did, and in her instruction to me of it, just informally in the living room, teaching me to run, jump, and squat next to her, which is very much in the rhythm of a swing out. But this notion, again, that we may not even recognize in our own conversations about our art and our sharing of it, calling it ease or calling it natural or effortless, does take away sometimes the effort to which people have to submit themselves to gain the knowledge that's contained within this movement. And it's something that deserves honor and recognition and acknowledgement, and we should speak about it in that way. So thanks, yeah.
Oh yeah, and I 100% agree with that. And I think, and also transitioning into the Lindy Hop, I think one way that we can both celebrate some amazing innovation and also highlight this pernicious anti-Black cultural misreading of skilled and trained virtuosity, excellence, musicality, and deep listening is by taking a close look at, and I use this language mindfully and intentionally because it's how I learned it, with the clip that's probably the most famous Lindy Hop clip out there, what was presented to me as the holy grail of the Lindy Hop. Yeah, in the worship of it, and also the acknowledgement that it's somehow unachievable. We can talk more about the complexities of that, but that's how it was framed for me when I started dancing, many years ago. This clip from the film Hell's a Poppin', which was a vehicle for the comedy duo Olsen and Johnson in 1941, which again features the ensemble Whitey's Lindy Hoppers performing a routine, but they are presented in the film as the help, right, as domestic workers, chefs, maids, etc., kind of sneaking off to have some fun, rather than doing a dance routine. So,
and just for folks' awareness, the order of dancers are Billy Ricker and Ms. Norma Miller, Al Menz and Willa Mae Ricker, Frankie Manning and Ann Johnson.
Yeah, in the set of solos that we're showing right now. sorry, that was a little more than I meant to show, so maybe we can.
I don't think we ever mind seeing more of that.
No, certainly not. Certainly not. I just kind of got in it and forgot to hit stop.
After that snatch, it's always just like, okay, well, this is amazing. But
Yeah.
thanks for that. And I hope folks are really enjoying this exploratory academic and social journey through the dance and the music. But one of the things that we really wanted to highlight by using this clip, of course, not just how amazing and incredible these professional dancers were, and they were professional dancers.
Yes.
And they also came from a ballroom of social dancers.
Mm-hmm.
So these steps and things that they created, these air steps, as they were called, because you're continuing the dance just in the air. So while there are notions of calling them aerials, it's like, yeah, that's a thing, but it's meant to be an air step, as in it has timing and rhythm that fits within the music. And while watching this clip, it's nice to hear, you know, the embellished moments by the I'm losing my words here. By the person who did the film scoring, but it wasn't the intent.
No.
That was not the intent, and
Yeah.
it was meant to fit into the spaces of the song "1 O'Clock Jump."
Oh, jumping at the woodside.
Right, jumping at the woodside, yes.
No, that's okay. Yeah, to say a little more
I was
about it. So the studio commissioned a new arrangement for you know, again, legal purposes with showing or having the song, as I think was common practice at the time. But the arrangement, I think, really took a lot from what was meant to be shown contextually in the film. The idea of amateurs and Black amateurs with so-called natural instinct for this dance, just going and having some fun. And from a project I'm doing about this arrangement, and also the original choreography to Jumpin' at the Woodside, together with my colleague Rachel Short, who is both a Lindy Hopper and a music theorist at Shenandoah University. We're talking about the ways in which this arrangement, whether it's through some of the modulation that happens or the interaction between the instruments, really shows a lot of just kind of perpetually escalating frenetic energy, and it provides one reading or encourages one understanding of this film that really fails to capture all of the nuanced musicality that is in this routine, that really comes out when you hear it to the song that Frankie Manning choreographed it to, which is Count Basie's recording of Jumpin' at the Woodside. And when I say Frankie Manning choreographed it, of course, as any dancer who is in an ensemble knows, even if one person gets credit for leading or being the choreographer, there is always a co-creative element that we don't necessarily have all the information about, of all of the creative energy, both from the dancers in this, and innovative ideas, both from the dancers in this clip and from dancers on the social floor of the Savoy Ballroom and other spaces, whose labor and contributions are unseen in that particular attribution. But this has been synced up to Jumpin' at the Woodside. So let's take a look at that same section again, and just in the ways that Norma Miller, sorry?
In the ways that it was intended.
Indeed, yeah. So we can see in the way that the piano lines up with Billy Ricker and Norma Miller stomping with each other, the way in which one of their air steps, where she flips over his back, plays with that little kind of tinkling on the piano section, or where Al Minns and Willem May Ricker, when they do that handstand, it hits a 2-bar break, or when a number of the flips and the kick and things that Frankie Manning and Ann Johnson are doing are really in sync with the riff that the horns are playing. Mm-hmm. And when I first heard this synced up, it was an absolute revelation for me, and I'll never see this scene in the same way again.
Oh, this is so good. Ugh.
And even when I was in my own head not to do it, I still let that keep going beyond my stop point for the presentation.
But I hope the audience was able to take in a bit of what you were articulating notationally. And it's most simply put, they were dancing the crap out of the song. They were dancing the song like they meant it, like they loved it, like they know it. And it wasn't necessarily just about memorizing the song, though I'm sure that was a bit of what occurred from hearing it so many times in practice and in parties. But more than that, this intake, this synthesis of these traditional rhythms, these calls and responses that the band would do amongst themselves to produce these great works of music, as well as listening to the band members practice and rehearse these things over and over again. And likewise, the musicians being inspired by the dancers' translation of the music, all incorporated or all conspired, I guess you would say, to really give these dancers, these movers, a real sense of how to employ their bodies in service to showcasing this music. And that's a skill that, yes, you can say it's natural, but it's still a deep level of entrainment that occurs in order for that to happen.
And and don't take our word for it. Let's hear it from Frankie Manning, who in the autobiography that he wrote with Cynthia Millman has this line about how he explicates his own choreographic process. And he says, "When I'm choreographing, the first thing I think about is the music. It's my inspiration. Usually I work from a recording. On rare occasions, I might make up a step to a swing tune that I'm humming. My goal is for the audience to see the dancers and musicians working in sync. The majority of what I do is accent certain beats, phrases, or sounds with a movement. Like I might kick out my leg just as the drummer hits a downbeat. I'm pretty good at phrasing steps into musical rhythms, and I'm partial to movements that go smoothly into the next one or end with a break. Most of all, I want to emphasize the riffs the band was playing, or the band is playing."
I love the way that Frankie said that. Uh, it's for me translating, and I know you translate as well. I'm pretty good at phrasing steps into musical rhythms.
Yeah, I'm pretty good. Yeah.
I'm great at keeping musical time, and I know when things are going to climax or resolve. And I'm partial to movements that go smoothly into the next one or end with a break, meaning I'm damn good at swing. I am damn good at swinging the thing, and I appreciate Frankie's affirmation of his own skill. And I know we're speaking a lot about the men that have sired or are being presented or put forth with regard to a lot of these art forms, but the women we know, or hopefully you know, or you will know after this, are a large reason for why much of this dancing was created, and not just in the courtship aspect of things, but for their artistic prowess and ability to inspire as well. So yeah, I just love that Frankie mentions how much he recognizes that he's just good at doing what he does.
Absolutely. And to bring Jackie Malone back into the conversation, right after that piece that you quoted before, she immediately talks about this idea of dancing the song. She highlights dancing the song as a practice that comes from West African traditions and from practices among Black people in the United States in times of enslavement. She says, quote, "A tendency to dance the song was preserved in the secular and sacred expression of US slaves." And then it, of course, moves into all sorts of practices in the rural South, in Southern cities during the Great Migration to the Midwest and the North and across the country, and then makes its way into these iterations of Black music and dance that we get on record and see on film. And that is so central, as Frankie Manning articulates, to his choreographic process. And that's certainly not exclusive to him, but it is the example we have
Exactly.
in this instance.
It's one of those things that we were talking about most deeply, repetitively, I guess I would say, in the course of our developing this kind of flow, this outline framework that we have for this presentation. But just that, again, and it's going to continue to be repetitive because it's the truth. This was a result of their lived experiences. And part of this is not just to sound academic, their lived experiences were contained within the Savoy Ballroom and with the people that they walked down the street with every day and played basketball with every day and shared just basic life things with every day. And in all of that, they were sharing these rhythmic moments, sharing these melodic discoveries, and it all continued to inform everyone's celebration to this music, the celebration of themselves and their community to this music, I meant to say.
Absolutely.
And so one of my favorite things is recognizing how from my own movement practice and many other house dancers and street and club dancers like myself too, we have a very visceral memories of some of those nights of transcendence where you were just in the space and you just feel everybody's energy and you hear the music and you vividly remember how the DJ changing to this one song just made the entire room erupt. And not just the performative, and I don't mean performative as in like stage performative, but those moments of actual physical expression or translation of what you said, of what you heard and felt. Not just that, but like how it continued outside of that space and how once you left that cocoon of the club, that even outside you were talking about these things and riffing off of these things and people seeing you going down the street, seeing your exuberance and engagement with each other, and then themselves being inspired to move and express themselves in a different way that day, how that just continues to fan out and fuel other dance moments and dance creations. And I love to speak about Whitey's Lindy Hoppers in this way and their ballroom chrysalis and their process of every day going to these band rehearsals and sitting with this music, living with this music, allowing it to, like they were marinating this music like every day and allowing it to inform not just how they express how they live their lives, but inversely how they live their lives.
Absolutely. And I learned some about that when I wrote my dissertation for my PhD on the late great Chick Webb and his orchestra and his connection with dancers in general, but also at the Savoy Ballroom, but also with this specific group of dancers in Whitey's Lindy Hoppers, with whom, whether it was during the day when they shared practice space and conversations, or in the ballroom during evenings for social dancing, or during competitions, or when they went on the road as a packaged stage show, again, these places of social competition and performance dancing, feeding into each other. And one conversation in rhythm, to use a phrase from you that I really enjoyed, and also the one kind of conversation in rhythm that we might call both a social conversation, but also at times a kind of competition, were these gotcha moments where musicians and dancers would kind of trade rhythmic licks from each other. And I had the tremendous honor to interview both Frankie Manning and Norma Miller for my research. And Frankie in particular, I got to interview him just a few months before he passed away. Another dear friend and hero and legend, Dawn Hampton, set up that interview for me. She told Frankie about my research, and he was excited to talk about Chick Webb and encouraged me to call. So that was the first oral history interview I ever did as a nervous graduate student, but he, as a seasoned interviewee, really helped me through it. And there was one really special moment in the interview, because this was after his autobiography had come out, and there were all these passages where he talked about these gotcha moments, or these moments of trading riffs back and forth. And one thing he told me in that interview is it was a particular professional competency for drummers like Chick Webb, born out of vaudeville spaces and traditions, to be able to catch when a dancer's hand would flare out, which was an example Frankie gave me, and catch what they were doing. And there was a special moment in that interview where I told Frankie that I really wished his autobiography had come with a companion CD of him scatting out all these rhythms that he and Chick Webb would do with each other, and he very generously did one over the phone while I was interviewing him. So I'm going to go ahead and play that, and I actually do. It can be kind of difficult to hear this interview. Again, it was my first oral history interview. I didn't have great audio footage at the time, so but I do in a presentation I gave several years ago for the Dance Studies Association. I've got a transcription of that rhythm and a transcription of him speaking in this interview to go along with the audio. So I'll go ahead and show that.
And I had been trying to learn this step like in a rehearsal, I said, oh, wow, I could do this. And another step was something like jump, boom, 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 shuko, diko, dum, something like that. That was the kind of rhythm of the step, And when I got in the contest, the Chick Webb band was playing, and I was trying to do that step, And I know the first time I kind of messed it up, and I just kept on dancing. And then I tried to do it again, and when I tried to do it the second time, Chick caught it, because he would play, right. You know what I mean? So I don't know, I just remember that, because I remember to me, I said, man, I can't get this damn thing. And then when I heard Chick, like doing that, and it was such, I said, oh wow, yeah. And I looked up at him and smiled, and he smiled back, like he was playing the drums, and he just, if I could just look his hand, and he wanted to have me when I looked at him and smiled, just as to say, gotcha. Yeah.
Oh, I love that.
And then I'll play briefly. I found that rhythm, that chuk dum chaka chuka dum, on a live recording, a radio transcription of an air check that the Chick Webb Orchestra did from the Savoy Ballroom. I believe this is 1939, of their arrangement of Count Basie's 1 O'Clock Jump. And just before they get into the shout choruses, you can hear in the drums, tum 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 chuka chuka chum.
So great. So great.
And so that's another.
I know we were talking about a lot of our explorations and like memories of this, but that's also another iteration of the expansion of this notion of partnership, right? Because while Frankie was dancing with their partner in the contest, they had this partnered experience, this ethereal, if you want to call it that, moment with Chick and this rhythm that they shared. I love those moments of intersection and creativity in the midst of the dance.
Right, and it's a case where the materials we have, even if we just have this one rhythm on record, the unvoiced presence is whatever dance step they had been working on for that context. And the further unvoiced presence is whatever rhythm they might have heard another band play in the ballroom that inspired that rhythm. And maybe that band saw another dancer somewhere else. So again, there's this iterative process in, again, this ballroom chrysalis, as you so beautifully phrased it, where we get these little documented artifacts that almost always, I would say, there is an intergenerational co-creative process in Black culture across art forms that is underwriting all of the things that we see and the things that we hear.
And it continues to this day. And that is that, as we were saying before in the beginning, that is that notion of the continuum. That is where it gets its steam. It continues to be recycled and reimagined and re-encapsulated by current artists, looking back to the things that inspired them to get to the point where they are and to bring those things forward. And by doing so, again, they just continue to reinvigorate and reinfuse those practices, not just the artifacts that we're talking about, but those practices of producing that. They recognize the importance of working with dancers and understanding how dancers understand the music and how dancers count the music. And it's a beautiful thing that this practice from musicianship also finds its way into dancership as well. One of my favorite notions of that, I think, oh, and actually, yeah, we're right on for that in our outline.
Yeah,
it's actually the repositioning of steps to fit the rhythms. So while we have these traditions, these traditional timings and shapings of things, when the music is asking something just a tad bit different of you, it's okay to push the rhythm or to reshape the steps to fit the rhythm to better showcase the music. And my favorite iteration of that is Marie Bryant and Harold Nicholas in the clip Mr. Beebe. And yes, they have an individual solo danced partnership in this piece. But more importantly for me, at my first intake of this was their relationship with the tradition. So their partnership with the tradition that they really explored and expanded is one of the things that I value most about this little clip of dancing. And as Christi J starts this, the biggest thing for me that was noted, because again, I was just becoming into my jazz vocabulary, but the step that they start with, you see, are called Susie cues. They traditionally start on the downbeat. Well, they start with a kick, but the push expression is on the odds. And you'll see as you listen to the music, it's a bit off time. I know Harold Nicholas was in the clip, but Marie Bryant. Marie Bryant.
Mm-hmm.
Marie Bryant.
Marie Bryant. I will say it also, and it can't be said enough times.
And I know for some of my very sticklers that you're going to look at it and be like, no, that's on the 1, 3, 5, and 7. And if you look at the intention of the step, it's very clear that it's 2, 4, 6, 8, as opposed to 1, 3, 5, 7. And it's so delicious in their articulation of it. And it just fits that lilt and flow of the music so beautifully. And I just really appreciate not just their artistry for this, but the licensure that they give to future generations to reshape. And we know we don't need license, as we say, but you also get inspired to do these things because you saw someone else do it. So we're not going to act like that's not a thing. But this, and even in this as well, like one of my, and maybe we'll get a chance to touch to this, or you can go and listen for yourself, but like the song Wailing Interval, you hear the soloist who's about to solo still with the group, but just taking this dissonant place in the rest of the lineup. And you're like, right, I can still be with you, but expressing my own individuality in that as well. So it's yeah, it's just a really powerful notion to move forward. And for me personally, I think this is one of the ways that a lot of our current dance styles were able to find their space, because by pushing the notation, I guess you would say, of the dance steps, we were able to find new space, how to reimagine and create art.
Absolutely. And part of that makes me want to ask you to dig into a little more of your listening process with swing music, because as we were putting this together, I know you really wanted me to play the song, the Cab Calloway recording of Picking the Cabbage. And I have enjoyed getting to know that song better, and I am happy to share it with our audience for this presentation as well, and pick your brain about what you love about this song.
Oh, whew, thank you.
It is painful every time I have to hit stop during this music and dance that we're sharing in this presentation.
It's so, oh, that song. I just love I'm a fan of subversion. To me, this song subverts all expectations. The way that baritone sax comes in, you're just like, what is this gonna be? I know that this is instrumentation that I'm hearing, but where are you going? Like, this is just wah wah. I was like, wait. Hearing it now with all of the movement that's been generated since that song has been created, and since the traditional jazz rhythms and steps have been created, it's quite literally what do we call it, the knowledge constipation. Hearing like the way that it washed over me the very first time I heard it, my mental Rolodex of movement to match, it was too much. Like, you're straddling too many planes of creativity. I don't know where to go right now. I could go anywhere with what you've just given me. Make it make sense.
Those moments of ecstatic short-circuiting, we might call it.
Yeah. Absolutely. I prefer that to the knowledge thing.
Or when you talk about the way that you're into those kinds of dissonance and subversion, might we also say, LaTasha, that you are a fan of the convergence of Blackness and the irreducible sound of necessarily visible performance at the scene of objection to bring Fred Moten back into the conversation?
Absolutely. And this is quite literally a lived moment of that for me. Because in this moment, I see and feel house. I see and feel hip hop. For those who are familiar with that, you can see that in my head nod to it. Like, it's clearly a big band swing tune, but the way that bass line rides across the entire track, it's like you can't not rock to it. It's impossible. And even if you carry the jazz vernacular and aesthetic, those stomp offs are going to get you, because that's what the song is asking you for. It's asking you to put it down. And it's just really powerful, not just to see other people translate in the same way, but to be able to be in a creative space to acknowledge that.
Yeah. And those stomp offs, which are the movement you used to open the piece we showed at the beginning.
Yeah. Exactly. It's a connector, and it's not, for me, it's not just because it's on the downbeat, but it does give a certain point of access, just like this music and all of these dance forms and styles do give you a point of access to understanding. And it is a language, as we say, and it's our responsibility to really try to understand how each of us are individually using that language to speak to each other.
Absolutely.
And to tie that physically to a thing that a musician is doing, it's like a Rosetta Stone. Like, oh, this is what I do when I hear you lay this down with the drums, and the drummers, oh yeah, well, I'm do that's okay, great. We have a point of understanding to create with each other, and it's amazing.
And while we're talking about this as a language, I think we both want to make clear that it would be it would be incorrect, a misreading, and deeply harmful to regard this as a language that, say, stopped being spoken and then was reinvigorated, because that's not the case very often. And this was what I learned when I started doing the Lindy Hop. It was the first narrative I got, and I'm really grateful to have been disabused of this notion. But when we talk about swing music in conversation with the Lindy Hop as a dance, that is a collaboration, and these are expressive forms of Black culture that are living dance and living music, that have never died and therefore never needed to be revived. And this whole kind of nostalgia complex behind the idea of revival is a function of white saviorism and white supremacy that I think we, of course, need to name and eradicate.
Continue to dismantle and unlearn. Yes. Yes.
Very much so.
And thank you for reiterating that, because I know we spoke about that several times with regard to all of the material that we put together to share with everybody today.
Yes.
But
I said that in this moment, but I want to make clear that it is the labor of Black dancers, musicians, and scholars in our community, and more broadly, speaking those words, doing the work to push that narrative. So just because I said it in this moment, I don't want to take credit for that idea at all.
And that's literally exactly what I was going to say too. And again, like reiterating once again, if you've made it this far in the presentation, that this is not the be all end all of the ideas of how this continuum has fostered the amazing work that it has. This is just Christi J's and my personal relationships and interpretations and experiences with this music and movement, and how they synchronize with one another.
So with that in mind, why don't we show a more recent Lindy Hop performance by the phenomenal group HellaBlackLindyHop from the International Swing Dance Championships,
Yes,
ISDC, in 2018.
And this is again just a conversational, the rhythm conversations, or conversations in rhythm between current dancers with music of the past.
That really does exemplify what we were talking about dancing the song.
Well, thank you for that. And I do want to share as well, I neglected to before the video started, but those dancers that were featured were Sarah Deckard, Manu Smith, myself dancing with Joshua McLean, who are the co-directors of HellaBlackLindyHop, Annalisa Sutherland and AJ Howard, Kyle Dixon, and Alexis Devia. But continue.
Oh, I was just gonna, well, especially in that there was one Charleston segment with Trading Places that was happening in there. I don't know if I'm terming that properly, but that really seemed to honor and play with the riff the band had going
Yeah.
in that moment.
And that's one of the other choreographic genius moments of Joshua McLean.
Mhm.
And
I have seen many of them over the years. He's fantastic.
Fantastic. And several of mine as well. And as well, again, like you were saying, it's a very co-collaborative experience when you're choreographing. But this was really just a beautiful, like you said, just a beautiful representation of the music, and not just these certain segments and shapes and only hitting beats, but actually showcasing what's happening in the music in the most beautiful way possible. And it was an honor to be a part of that. But even more than that, I hope folks see that this is now too, with some of the more athletic interpretations that we have of what Lindy Hop used to be. And I say athletic in the shapes and informations, because a lot of what we saw from then was kind of on the spot, because it was hyper fast. So to be able to do all of what we did on the size of a ballroom floor is really, really challenging. But to show how modern interpretations of this historic movement are now coming forward and reshaping and informing other dance as well, is really amazing to be a part of.
And even in when in that arrangement, the texture thins out a little bit and features the piano, and you are all kind of forming that semicircle, right? You're reflecting that affective change in your movement. And I think also even in this performance, highlighting some of that sociality of the ballroom chrysalis.
Yeah. I'm glad you can see all of that, because that's absolutely our intent. And it really is powerful to know, and it does affirm a lot of our work individually, and I hope for the work from many others too. Being a part of that process, that was the intent, and for you to receive it that way, it's like, good, we did the thing. But again, it does create quite some affirmation for our own research practices to note that hopefully what we're sussing from what we observe from historical footage and recordings is indeed what their intent was. So it's grateful for that.
Absolutely. Well, as we're talking about the Lindy Hop, even as we're making sure that we position this and really speak the truth of it as a living Black cultural tradition, one of the problems that I think creates that revival narrative, not that I think as though I'm the only person to ever think so, but I, along with many people, think that I along with the Black scholars, activists, mentors, musicians, and dancers who have helped me kind of unlearn and reprogram my own thinking, have helped me see that in more nostalgic framings of the swing era, and even incredible dancer, human being, artist, though he was Frankie Manning, that when we're talking about space and the negotiation of time and space, that necessarily means we're not only we're talking about history and narrative and historiography and negotiating space in the narrative, right? And when there can be this real danger on multiple levels, whether it is a nostalgic framing of the swing era or an exclusive spotlighting of Frankie Manning and his contributions, that we get into the issue of the danger of a single story. Yeah. And a couple of the things that this has me thinking about is when yourself and Monsell Durden were having a phenomenal conversation about his film in progress, his film series, Everything Remains Raw. He was talking about how we have these moments on film, but we don't always pay enough attention to people who were maybe not professionals or didn't pursue a particular kind of stage practice, or for whatever reason, their movement was not selected or captured or placed, or presented, placed on film in particular venues. And as Dr. Thomas DeFrance talks about, this creates an issue we need to consider with Black social dance broadly, of what our received archive is, and the ways in which social traditions, which may have been practiced largely by a broad community, get represented by specific virtuoso, idiosyncratic renditions of them. And then we get the sense that was the whole story, or that was the whole practice. And Another place where I think that plays out really broadly in jazz history is when we move from swing music to bebop, because there is this broadly held notion that bebop is when jazz stops being dance music.
Right.
And
nothing could be further from the truth.
yes, and you know what, I say broadly held notion, and I'll say that's, I got to catch myself with my own white racial frame on that, because that's the narrative I grew up with. That's the narrative I see in a lot of textbooks. It's the narrative that I've seen in lectures. But the more in my life I have talked to many Black people about bebop, this narrative is not so omnipresent at all.
Right. I was personally very present and aware of bebop as a young person, and not just in the musical terms or ways that most people would think, because I, like many of my fellow musician friends now, as we geek out often about, recognize bebop rhythms and quotings in hip hop music that we heard growing up. Much like my good friend Jesus talks about. His belief that Busta Rhymes was a student of Charlie Parker. And so I know some people are going to now geek out and go and try to find the albums that, like, oh, what is he quoting in this? But you listen to his timing and phrasing, like a lot of it feels and seems very similar to a lot of Charlie Parker's music.
And whether or not you end up making that connection, a lot of time spent listening to Charlie Parker and Busta Rhymes is time well spent. So
exactly. But to also expand on what you were sharing, like being a part of that virtuosic representation in certain things that I've won and have been elevated for, it's also very challenging to be that representation and asserting, as you're being looked to for guidance and answers and development, that you are not the be all end all of this thing, and still only being put forward as though you are. It's a very challenging and frustrating thing, but still carrying with it the responsibility to make sure that people don't forget this art form and the things that have been contributed to it by those who've inspired you and those who inspired those who inspired you. So it is a very, very interesting romanticizing that people tend to do about dance and dancers, as well as music and musicians. And it wasn't until, it's a very, very convoluted thing that I had to deconstruct and unlearn in my brain, to the point that I'd grown up in such a stunted mindset about Black art and our own value of our own art, that jazz was presented to me as a white thing. And Lindy Hop, the thing that white people did at weddings. And so when I came across my first bit of jazz footage, which was Hell's a Poppin', actually I take that back, it wasn't Hell's a Poppin', it was Keep Punching, that I was like, oh, here's a clip of some Black dancers doing jazz back in the day. Not the creators and innovators of jazz, but just some kids doing the thing that people talked about. And it's just very problematic to, as you were saying, to allow these misrepresentations and misreadings of art to go forward into the world, which is why I know I'm a huge proponent of calling jazz, this jazz that we're talking about, that started with Whitey's Lindy Hoppers and the generations that preceded them, because Whitey's Lindy Hoppers were second generation, maybe third generation by some people's perspectives as well. But to make sure that jazz is noted as jazz, because that is the jazz that inspired Fosse and Maddox and everyone else to do the things that they've done in movement terms. And just like we talk about, and as we're going to talk about Brubeck and many of their influences, they were inspired by Black musicians more often than not, to do what they did. And that deserves to be said. And it deserves to be said again. And it deserves to be said again and again and again, until it is not just a quip or a point of note. It is an accepted truth, because that is what it is.
Absolutely. And even
what we were saying.
Yeah, and as you're saying that, a connection that I think is finally forming for me is between two narratives of cultural erasure, one in jazz dance history and one in jazz music history, or cultural erasure, or a term that I learned from the great Brie Mason Campbell, ethnocide, that's at play here. And I think that there's a narrative happening on the one hand where there's a falsehood that Black practitioners are leaving or abandoning jazz dance, and I think that there's another side of that story in jazz music history where Black dancers are leaving jazz music because bebop isn't danceable, and so I think that we can complicate or really disrupt both of those narratives together by talking about bebop as a form of Black popular dance music.
Yeah.
And I want to show first a clip from Ken Burns's jazz series that I think really speaks to the misreading of jazz, this moment that's so important in a lot of jazz history classes that I've certainly heard repeated over and over and over again, that bebop's when jazz stops being for dancing bodies because it becomes for seated listening, which is seen as more serious and more rigorous and more intellectual. And this is, I think, a solid encapsulation of that deeply problematic narrative.
Great jazz soloists abandoned dreams of heading up big bands of their own, formed small groups instead, and retreated to nightclubs, places too small for dancing. All kinds of jazz were being played at the war's end, in clubs from 52nd Street in Manhattan to Central Avenue in Los Angeles. But whatever the style, the jam session had become the model. Freewheeling, competitive, demanding. The kind of jazz musicians had always played to entertain themselves after the squares had gone home. The swing era was over. Jazz had moved on. And here and there across the country, in small clubs and on obscure record labels, the new and risk-filled music was finally beginning to be heard. It was called bebop.
So problematic.
Yeah, they really sell it with that close up on the no dancing sign that pans out. And so I also don't want to, I always try to mind myself in not conscripting Black voices to serve my narrative, whatever that narrative may be. And so there were Black musicians who were invested in exactly this story. But again, Black people are not and are never a monolith. So there is a heterogeneity of perspectives on this music and on bebop and on what its relationship with dancing might be. And
from a dancer's perspective, my thought process, and as well as a military perspective, directives are not created unless someone did something at some point. So to have that sign saying no dancing, please, like, well, clearly they were trying to dance and maybe someone just didn't like it, possibly. Or maybe they were blocking someone's view of a musician being their most creative and amazing self.
Or as a college professor, a meme I saw online one time, fool me once, shame on you, fool me twice, it's going in the syllabus.
I have to remember that one. But it gives me pause. Again, like you're saying, doing our best to unlearn and not just apply our own desires to a lot of this information that we're taking in. Just seeing that sign, it's like, well, somebody did it. Otherwise, there wouldn't be a sign. So I took that in my initial intakes of people saying that bebop was not danceable. It's like, was it not, or could you just not?
And that I was going to read this quote in a bit, but I will go ahead and read it now. We have one of my favorite quotations on the subject comes from Amiri Baraka in the book Blues People, where he writes, "You can't dance to it was the constant harassment, which is, no matter the irrelevancy, a lie. My friends and I as youths used only to emphasize the pronoun more. You can't dance to it," and whispered, "or anything else for that matter."
it's a little shade there. It's a little salt in the wound. But I absolutely, especially being a house dancer, people saying that you can't dance to bebop. Like, well, then how did we get from here to that?
Exactly.
That makes sense.
And so let's share some history and show some footage that I think will help it make sense for everybody. And but first, again, acknowledging that multiple truths, multiple stories.
This is how it makes sense for us.
Yeah. That Frankie Manning, again, in his autobiography, affirmed this idea, at least for him, that it was not the music he was used to dancing to. It wasn't his groove initially in the same way. So he writes, quote, "I went to Minton's Playhouse to hear some jazz, and I said, what the heck is going on? I was used to music for dancing, but this new sound was only for listening. At first, I was devastated because it was such a big change for me."
Mm-hmm.
Now, but even there, I had the very good fortune several years ago to interview two phenomenal dancers, Sylvan Augustus Charles from Harlem and Barbara Sidbury from Bedford-Stuyvesant in Brooklyn, who were, I think, a generation after Frankie and Norma and Alan Leon and that generation of dancers, for whom bebop was among the popular music they grew up with, alongside Louis Jordan and R&B, calypso. This was all part of. There was a corpus of popular music for Black teenagers in the 1940s, 1950s, and bebop was part of it. It wasn't separate from it as some kind of carved out art object in that way. And Sylvan Augustus Charles actually also ended up with a career in the post office, and as Frankie Manning did. And one of the things that Mr. Charles, or Charlie as he likes to go by, told me when I interviewed him is he, in subsequent conversations with Frankie, is saying that Frankie Manning kind of did ultimately get this and understand what the musicians were doing, and ultimately cited Dizzy Gillespie's 1948 bebop big band as among his favorites. But with that in mind, I want to read just a couple of small quotes from Charlie and from Barbara when I interviewed them and asked them about this commonly held, or this commonly held, at least among my people, assumption that bebop's not dance music, or it's not danceable, or it's not for dancing. And Charlie said that was, quote, a joke. That's the biggest joke they have going. And Barbara, who is a delightful person, I'm very lucky she is my neighbor here in Phoenix, Arizona, and invites me to her house for parties sometimes, which are incredible. She said, there was never anything too hard for me to dance to, whether it was bebop, swing, or whatever the dance was out there, I was in it.
I love it.
And we also have even Dizzy Gillespie, who wrote an essay, or as he called it, a piece of counter-bopaganda for the Los Angeles Sentinel in 1949, where he said, quote, "Another argument against bop is that people can't dance to it. Well, I've seen people dancing to our band and to our RCA Victor recordings, such as Swedish Suite, all over the country."
Mm-hmm. And it really was one of those genres that I think, like you were saying, it is for listening, but it's for deep listening, in that you rely on your body's responsiveness to produce or to translate in the moment, just like you did with Lindy Hop. And it was sad for me to read a lot of these accountings that many dancers that I looked up to felt that they were just not able to produce or generate. And that was the thing. It was just at a time where they had been so steeped in producing in a particular way that they just didn't want to open themselves up to that. Not fully. But again, coming from my background, coming from post bebop into house, expressing yourself at a microsecond to the music and movement, like in real time, not just in a prescribed or choreographed way. I could feel that understanding from bebop. And so it was a beautiful notion for me to be able to inscribe just a little bit that into the flow of my Lindy Hop, the way that I share it. So Yeah, I like to re-inform my Lindy Hop with my
Mhm.
bebop-esque understanding of movement and movement translation now. And
And
there's several other dancers who do too.
Mhm. And it is sometimes the case, and I, not speaking from personal experience, but I think I can at least suspect this is a cross-cultural thing that some it's not uncommon that someone is not immediately on board with the popular music of a generation one generation younger.
Exactly.
Sometimes that takes a little time and a little negotiation.
But to move ahead, could we share the footage of
Absolutely.
Barbara and
Um,
Charlie?
yeah,
And
absolutely.
Martin, you can edit this out because sadly I have a call that I have to take at 4:30 or 4:45. So I think we have like 30 minutes to finish.
Oh no, okay. So let's get right to it then. Well, I'll say briefly just that there were many spaces where bebop dancing is done too that we know about, both from the folklorist documentarian Mira Den in her writings, and also from Charlie and Barbara, are that the Audubon Ballroom in Harlem, of course now known more famously tragically as the site of Malcolm X's assassination, but it was also an active ballroom in Harlem for many years. And also the Chateau Gardens, a venue downtown on Houston Street in Manhattan, were two key venues for this. And Charlie and Barbara both knew those venues well as the spots for bebop dancing, as did Randy Weston. So especially the Chateau Gardens on Houston Street, it was in Lower Manhattan, but it was also a real hub for the Brooklyn scene. So Randy Weston and others from Brooklyn remembered going down there, where there was a lot of bebop dance happening at that venue in Lower Manhattan. And one of the things about the music itself that makes people assume it wasn't danceable is the tempo, just how fast it was. And a number of dancers danced to bebop at tempo, but also a really common practice, and again, we're back to the idea of negotiating time and space, was the idea of dancing to bebop, as Charlie referred to it, off time.
As I mentioned about Marie Bryant sharing traditional steps to jazz music beforehand. So
Indeed. So a musician might call this dancing half time, or dancing at half the tempo. So if something's at 280 BPM, dancing it at 140. So instead of it being here, it's here. And I'm going to show some footage that we were able to film. And again, these interviews and the dance demonstration was arranged by Judy Pritchett and filmed by Jocelyn Hassenfeld. And here is Sylvan Augustus Charles and Barbara Sidbury dancing off time to Bud Powell's Whale. Again, this is raw footage, so you will see Jocelyn moving around with the camera, trying to find the best angles from which to keep up with these two phenomenal dancers.
how saucy they are. Oh, they're so good.
Absolutely, and you can see so much groove in their bodies at the multiple levels at which they're feeling that pulse.
Yeah.
and playing with it at different levels in different parts of their body. You can see some of that in the subtle, quick, syncopated footwork
Yeah.
that they're
As
doing
well
as
as
well.
like you say, in the upper body movement too.
Hmm.
I know it looked mostly still, but for those who are really looking, you can see the little groove in the shoulders and the slight lilt of a head or a tip of a head. So it's really powerful to see how these dancers are recalling their youthful expressions to bebop music also.
Yeah,
And I
absolutely.
know you were saying too that there was another individual form, well, not necessarily individual, but another foundational aspect of bebop that was shared called Applejack.
Applejacking, and I'm happy to get to that in a moment. I did want to, if we can, just play one Charlie Parker,
Oh
Dizzy
yeah.
Gillespie recorded to talk a little bit more about this idea of playing with time, because to my mind, that the off time movement that we're seeing here from Charlie and Barbara, and that is a part of this tradition, is also reflected in the music. That idea of playing with multiple time feels, multiple levels at which we can place that core tactus or the pulse is so fundamental to bebop music. It's something I really hear strongly in this recording done in 1950, released in 1952, featuring Dizzy Gillespie, Charlie Parker, Thelonious Monk, Curly Russell, and Buddy Rich playing My Melancholy Baby. And in this recording, My Melancholy Baby is almost an anchor that brings them back into time, into their kind of slow or mid-tempo groove on this song. But they do a lot of play with double time of in their solos, in their individual expression, creating this time feel that might make you think or feel that the tactus is twice as fast. And then going back to the melody, going back to what we might hear as a vocal line, to return to that groove. And Curly Russell on bass is pretty much holding it down the whole time, creating that grounding point for the other musicians to play with these different levels of time feel. So I'm going to start this after there's a solo from Charlie Parker and a solo from Dizzy Gillespie where they both play with this idea. And then in the last minute of the recording, we move from Thelonious's Monk solo. You'll hear Buddy Rich on the drums playing with a little bit of double time for a moment. And then you will get a little double time interpolation before the very end of the song. Sorry, let me go ahead and cue that up. And I'll just say, LaTasha, I'm sorry, in bringing that back in, I don't want to take away time from your getting to really talk about house dance. So do you want to move on from here or show Applejack or?
Kind of, but I think I was just getting a message from Caleb. I think we're able to push our meeting back to 4:45.
Okay. Well, and I apologize for not having the situational awareness to see we're trying to push us there.
So good.
Yeah.
Oh, the harmonizing at the end, so beautiful.
Absolutely. And what I love about bebop music and dance is in some ways we're almost pushing a conversation in rhythm. It's now a conversation in meter, a conversation in tempo as well.
Powerful. But again, like we were saying before, how these negotiations within the band also reflect the negotiations within self, within community, and those various partnerships that are often overlooked when we're talking about partner dancing and what it means to be in a partnership and dancing. So, yay.
So yeah, so let's go ahead and talk about applejacking, and I'm going to show two examples. One is from the early 1950s, and this is footage that that breathe and 3, 2, 1. So I'm going to show some footage from the film The Spirit Moves. This is footage from Mira Den and Herbert Motter that they shot at a dance at a public school in Brooklyn at PS 28 in around 1951, 1952, I believe. And one of the things that you can see in this Applejack footage, and again, this is a dance that came from an earlier jazz step
called the Applejack.
Yeah, that grew with bebop into a larger form because of the ways it facilitated a lot of intricate movement in the footwork. And I will say that you may read about it in places, including in Mira Den's work, that it was mostly done by men. She says in some of her notes that women danced it, but seldom. But when I asked Barbara about whether it was done exclusively by men, she said, "Oh, hell no." So
we have our footage of the Big Apple line dance, Keep Punching, to refute that as well.
Yeah, indeed.
Doing the Applejack thing too. So.
And so one thing to note as you're watching this footage is there's going to be one moment where the dancer on screen on the right is going to be moving in 4/4. And the other dancer is going to be doing a pattern that's in groupings of 3 at half the speed. So while we've got this over here, we're going to have and I actually showed this footage to Charlie and Barbara, and while Charlie was looking at it with me, he pointed to exactly this moment as an example of off time as the two dancers were dancing in different time feels simultaneously. Here it comes right here.
What I love most about that footage, in addition to seeing people actually dancing to bebop music, is its connectedness for me personally, and hopefully other house dancers will see the same. But for a lot of the movement traditions that we have, or the just the shaping of our movement expression in-house, it's very similar to that movement in all of its forms, even the off time, the over exaggerated like rhythms and steps and things at some places, as well as that underlying groove and these accentuated and elongated languishing, not languishing, sinewy moves of the arms and legs. So it's really just powerful to see how, again, this digging back, this Sankofaism of the movement continues to perpetuate over and over again. Because while we had the vernacular jazz step of Applejack that now is manifesting as a group dance individually, which also became a partner dance, like people Applejack together, this naming convention and intention move forward in time. And even though we have still the Applejack from vernacular jazz, it's now in street and club dance culture, a grounded out movement that involves hands touching ground and feet kicking up. So it's progressed in what what it actually embodies and signifies generationally, but its intention of groundedness and characterizing the music is still the same.
Absolutely. And I am so excited myself to learn more from you about these connections with house dancing. And before we get there, do we want to have a look at and hear from Charlie and Barbara
Yes.
one more time, because they very generously demonstrated some applejacking for us to Charlie Parker's Ornithology, which was a tune that Charlie specifically requested.
Charlie dancing to Charlie.
Okay, so I'm going to show this clip of Charlie and Barbara dancing Applejack, and of course, enjoy, take in, and think about anything you want to hear. I will say, having watched this a number of times, including, I was worried about whether we were seeing everything they were doing with their feet, so I busted out my cell phone and recorded their feet until it died in another video, and watching that back. One thing that I've really started to notice in this footage is if you listen for the Charlie Parker's saxophone playing and see what Charlie's doing with his knees, there's a lot happening there. And also what Barbara is doing with her feet and her footfalls in concordance with the piano and how it's comping are just two pieces of musicality I think are really beautiful here.
Ah, so good, so good, so good. And I love their rolling call and response to the band responding to each other in that last rollout. It's so beautiful.
Absolutely.
So beautiful. But a lot of, especially Miss Barbara's undulating through in her steps, very, very familiar movement and encapsulation as far as like how we see things like loose legs and other steps that we use in house dance. And it's just so beautiful to see the connection that we know is there, but has possibly been overlooked because of this narrative that bebop was not danceable. And there are, of course, other things that have influenced and inspired house, but it's just beautiful to see this particular other cog that was missing in that machine, that wheelhouse, if you will, that is house dance now. So I've appreciated so much building this presentation with you. So I just get excited about that every time I see that clip. It's so great.
I think we're allowed to be excited on camera, even though we're scholars. We're allowed to like stuff.
But this applejacking, I'd heard the term previously, but only with regard to the step of vernacular jazz. I know I saw it when I watched Spirit Moves, but for whatever reason, I think I thought I was hallucinating for some reason. And I just kind of glossed over it, and it's been finding its way back into my purview to really make sure that this is another touch point that is put forward specifically for current dance generations to be aware of. Because I know we talk often about this this self-erasure that's also happening a little bit in the Black community, where yes, we do need to go back and stay connected to our roots. However, we need to not overlook the many, many years of creativity and productivity that happened here in America. As problematic as many things are here, the beautiful art that we were able to produce here deserves to be regarded for its beauty and its prowess and its creativity, and its virtuosity, as we keep saying.
Yes, absolutely.
So
Including among amateur practitioners, amateur like Charlie
Yeah.
and Barbara, who
Right.
you know are incredible dancers. Maybe because they didn't appear in certain films, hadn't been asked to share their stories.
And it's important for, again, like we keep saying, we academically, they say, you know, these are a result of their lived experiences, but not enough of us take it upon ourselves to actually reach back and find out who were a part of those people's lived experiences and why they might have had some of the, what influence those people might have had on the ones who were the more widely known or popular figures of that represent those eras or those points of understanding. So
Indeed. Although I do want to quickly give credit to, I remember when I interviewed Charlie, he did say that a woman named Naomi, I do not know her last name, I apologize, but she was a regular at the Cotton Club, had reached out and had interviewed him prior to our interview.
yeah, and of course, there's always more than just us doing the work, right? But we do need to continue to say that if you love it, be responsible for it and to it, and actually do your full due diligence about the cultures that you claim to love and represent. That
part.
100%. But in doing that, it was so amazing to me to understand this connected point. Because I know I saw it in many 90s music videos and things like that. And we were going to show CeCe Peniston's Keep on Walking, but you can look that up yourself. And some of you might already have some familiarization with that. But to see how jazz was being reinscribed in Black popular music going forward. But while we were having that experience here in the States, in the UK, jazz bebop was living its best life in styles called UK jazz rock and jazz fusion. And one of my really great friends, John Agasilas, and I apologize if I butchered your name, John, was a part of some really amazing efforts to share this movement. And he's doing an incredible job teaching this movement now. And this for me is where the partnership continues to expand, as in this bebop music partnered with Black popular music and all of these other things. And house music was born. I know it's a bit more complicated than that for my musicologist. I'm not saying that that was how house music was born, like, period. That's not it. But, you know, taking into account, yes, the Chicago sound and the New York creative innovations and the Philadelphia sound that was a part of, you know, the R&B and disco era too, to come to a place where this music is now being celebrated in the way that it is on the dance floors through house, through genre of house or electronic dance music, if you want to call it that. I call it house. But it's just really popular. It's really not just popular, but powerful, excuse me. But I just want to show a little bit of what John and his brothers shared to bebop.
Indeed. That was incredible. Can I ask you a quick question about it?
Yeah,
All right, a couple. So
I'm not an expert in UK jazz, but I can.
okay. I noticed some of the vocabulary I recognized in there included a lot of acrobatic tap stuff, like over the tops and splits that kind of recalled the Berry Brothers for me.
Yeah.
Is that an explicit influence, or?
Yeah, from what John tells me, they were very widely, very much influenced by a lot of tap dancers and jazz dancers. And I know, we've had this conversation several times. For me, tap is just jazz dance with different shoes. That's not to take away anything one from the other. It's not meant to be offensive to either style or form. It's just to say that they are both very, very beautiful footwork intensive styles. And yeah, so John was saying that they do take a lot of inspiration from I guess like the Berry Brothers and the Nicholas Brothers and the Four Step Brothers and many other trios and performance groups that were based in tap. So, and as you can see, other films like Monsell Durden's, who we were speaking about already, Everything Remains Raw, as well as Sally Summers' Check Your Body at the Door, shows us very visibly how these moves of the past have been retranscribed into future generations. And it's really amazing, not just to see and take in the research about it, but to actually converse and to dance and to share space with artists who have done this negotiation for themselves and have brought these movements into the future. So it's so amazing to see. Yeah, we had this, this groove, really heavy applejacking and like partner thing happening to bebop, as well as this crazy acrobatic, high flying, super performative version, which is just like we have when we talk about Lindy Hop and every other style. There's the social, there's the there's the performative, and then there's the hyper performative and competitive aspect of it. So, which is beautiful to see that this notion continues.
It's interesting to hear you talk about the characterize the competitive or the competition as the hyper performative here, because there's also, we might call it the hyper social, right? Because there's
that has its own competitive elements.
Exactly.
Yes. But and it's not meant to be diminishing in the sense of it being performative. Because we do a lot of work to prepare how we're going to compose and structure ourselves, even in improvisational ways. Like you spend a lot of time being in your body to understand how you are most comfortable expressing yourself that day, if and when you should hear a sound that might generate a particular vein of movement or a particular idea. So it's not, in my opinion, it's not a misnomer to say that it is performative. But
calls to mind the term improvography, which I have heard from you several times now.
I'd love to borrow that from the late great Gregory Hines. Improvography is exactly that. It's the place where the negotiation of improvisation and choreography. So again, this perpetual negotiation of time and space. It's ever present, ever generating. And it's meant to, some people have issue with it. They feel like, oh, that's just a space where somebody forgot the choreography and had to make something up. It's like, it could be in some situations and settings. But for me personally, I feel like it's a space that, much like our presentation today, having an outline and a decided form or offerings of particular things that you want to contribute or give, but it still allows you space to make those connections in a very organic and authentic way.
Yes.
As opposed to scripting how one idea gets to the next exactly throughout. So, and it's just beautiful to see that tradition in the UK jazz. It's so powerful. And those dancers, I believe, were Levi and Dave Graham, Gary Nurse, and John Agasilas. That you just saw. Yes.
Great.
That's correct.
Well, since we were talking about the Berry Brothers' influence, I know there's also a quotation from James Berry from an essay that he wrote in dialogue with Miraden that we are both really excited about. Do you want to offer that James Berry quotation?
I know, because we moved this quote around so many times because
it's relevant everywhere.
It's relevant everywhere. But James is talking about again, as I was sharing this notion of Sankofa, going back and allowing what came before you to inform you. And he shares, we had a variety of steps to choose from because of the eras before us. Each one could break off and dance whatever occurred to them during a break in the Lindy Hop, then come together on the beat after 2 bars. Lindy was called breakaway in the beginning. When you break, you are on your own to dig back. And again, that's James Berry too, Morton and Jazz Profound. And I read it the way that I did to leave the suspense of whatever, because like we were saying, it could fit wherever. He was speaking about the Lindy Hop, but it's true for any dance form. And when you're dancing with another person, you decide on a step, you start shim-shamming, and then you can break away and do whatever. And then in 2 beats, you know you're going to have the music to rely on to bring you back in to start doing a thing together again. And it's just really highlights again the importance of being aware of what came before what you do and who you are, and its importance, its influence to that journey, the journey that you're going to have with whatever art that you're choosing to engage in. So,
and both in the HellaBlackLindyHop performance and in the piece from 2016 that we opened with, I think you can really see you and see the other dancers in HellaBlackLindyHop digging back, not just in that literal way of doing a rock step in the Lindy Hop, but intergenerationally.
Yes, ancestrally, intergenerationally, yes. And it's a powerful thing to quite literally sit in the steps of those who've created like these amazing art forms, and then to recognize in some points, especially as an educator and a cultural producer, that someday people are going to be sitting in the steps that you've created, and how important it is to make sure that you're not just paying homage, but actually opening up a pathway for those who come after you to create things for people to sit in and to more deeply understand them, and through them understand you. So it's just amazing that it's just in this little thing that people like to call dance holds so much. And groups like Brothers in Jazz, IDJ, and John's group, Jazz Fusion, are a really crucial link that I think is often overlooked, as well as is vernacular jazz, to how we've gotten a lot of the beautiful creative movement that we have today, like Light Feet and hip hop and Chicago footwork and Memphis striking, and so many different styles and iterations of expression to music that borrow one from the other. That is it's so profound, so profound.
And since you mentioned Brothers in Jazz, I know we have more footage to show from them. Do you want to tell me a little bit more, or tell us a little bit more about Brothers in Jazz and what we're going to see?
Actually, with this clip, no, I'll let this one speak for itself.
Okay. Great. Should I just start it from the beginning?
Yeah.
Okay.
You'll be on your way very shortly.
Yeah, I just seeing, taking, subverting again where you think one might exist, with that song and then pushing it. It's so fascinating to see how it happens in both ways, both veins.
Just like we heard in My Melancholy Baby, this play with the expectations of where time lives.
Yeah. It's such a beautiful way to say that too. Talking again, or speaking further about how these individual forms or ways of moving inspired and informed partnered ways of moving. One of my favorite examples of this in house dance, which is the style that came out of the gay clubs in late 70s, early 80s, based in Chicago at a place called the Warehouse, also showed the same element of individual understanding and desire informing a partnership. So we have in this contest called Juste Debout, which was the world street dance battle, the two of my favorite dancers, Sandrine and Meech, sharing not just, everybody would call it commando style, and it's where you have a routine that you sort out together. But the most beautiful thing about these routines, and as you go back and watch more of this footage, is that you don't know what song the DJ is going to play. So in the moment, not only are you expressing this choreographic moment that you put together, but reshaping it to fit the music. And to see them sharing in side-by-side partnered ways, as well as physically connected partner ways, is just one of the most beautiful correlations that I know of, tying the Lindy Hop and all of the partnered expressions that came before it to this current dance style. So let's take a look. Just so good. Just so good. Now, can you tell me what things that you noticed about their expression, their partnership?
Well, one, that it's clearly a form of partner dancing.
Whether you're touching or not.
Indeed, yeah, and I think that broadly, when we talk about partnered dancing, there's perhaps an over focus on just the haptic, and that there are types of energetic kinesthetic connections that we can feel through all of our senses, not just through touch, and that is certainly a part of what is happening there, and also even in those moments where they are in sync with each other, you can see some small yes anding, right?
And some large yes anding.
yes, and some large yes anding. So it in some ways reads like a conversation, and not that I would presume to compare my own experiences to these brilliant dancers, but I notice it even sometimes in the conversations that you and I have, where sometimes it's yes anding, riffing off each other, and sometimes we arrive at the same words at the same time. And so it's very, very dialogic, and also with and at times against the grain of the beat, and then landing back with it. So
it's taking that opportunity to dig back.
Yes.
Not just into the rhythms, but into itself, the choreography that they produce. So how Barry was talking about the canon of movement that you can access from learning all of these things, it's true in that same performative and sharing moment as well. You dig back to the movement that you outlined for yourself for that particular presentation, that moment of sharing,
Yes.
and use that to source everything going forward. So it's just powerful to me to see that it has that correlation. And that, of course, was one of the clips that inspired me to become a house dancer in the first place.
Oh, fantastic.
Yeah. Yeah. And
well, thanks to them for that as well, because so many of us have benefited from your journey.
Thanks for that. But it's and I know we're going to come to a close after such an extraordinary sharing session. And
we're going to come to a pause.
A pause, yes, because it is a continuum, just like we're talking about now.
But
so
did we want to show that one other piece of footage that you were just sent today?
Oh yes, absolutely. And this is just to continue again to tie back that just because some people aren't capable doesn't mean it's not a thing. And this is John present day sharing his UK jazz.
All right.
So for 50-year-olds who think that you can no longer dance, I present John Agasivas. Absolutely incredible articulation. And I hope that you can start to see the sussing of the groove underneath the acrobatics and the powerful steps.
Yes, of course. And also for 37-year-olds like myself who need some motivation to get back in shape as we hopefully emerge from this pandemic. Wow, that was incredible. Yeah. Well, and you can see, even like you were talking about with air steps, their steps, they're grounded in rhythm. There are some things that, at least I know from tap as things that are couched as kind of acrobatic or flash steps, but those over the tops were small and grounded and deeply rhythmic, as well as that propeller. So,
and it's just the thing that I love most about all of these intersections is not just their intersectedness, but it's how that they continue to inform one another. Seeing, again, like you were saying, those were flash steps, and it does provide a moment of spark, but it also, as you saw John employing it just now, can be a moment of groundedness. It can be a pathway of holding down the rhythm, as opposed to just this grandiose thing that's meant to tack or accent a particular rhythm. So I just deeply appreciate that. And to bring all of this together, the partnerships that we were talking about between dancers and musicians, just to further explore and to share from my personal practice, this offering. And I think we're going to close with this. And we may have some other thoughts after this footage, but and we did have some other things to share, but we found our way in this conversation organically, just to kind of bring it to a space of a new understanding, hopefully, for everybody who was tuned in. But in my personal journey and exploration of deepening my partnership with the music, as well as myself, the amazing drummer, Josh Colazzo, and I embarked upon.
Tasha, I think we can't hear you. We've lost audio for you.
You can't hear me? Hello?
Martin, are you able to hear LaTasha?
Hello?
Oh, that was, I'm so sorry. That was just me.
Oh no.
That was, I was making sure I had that clip queued and I didn't want the sound to play, so I muted my audio and then momentarily forgot that I had done that. I'm so sorry to interrupt you while you were being all profound and
Okay.
right at our denouement.
It's okay, Martin. When you go back, you can just take it back to Josh Colazzo. And this is the tuxedo one, yes.
Oh no, this is Lindy Fest 2018, but I can pull up the other one.
Oh no, it's fine. It's fine.
Are you sure?
Yeah. Let's do the tuxedo one.
Okay.
And so the amazing drummer, Josh Colazzo, and myself had explored this this partnership previously in an effort to make space in a particular soundscape that was already being occupied by big band music for me to share house music, or house dancing rather, but to a soundscape that would be more effective and influential to holding down some of that four on the floor, kind of rhythmic projection. And because of that, that led to that exploration that we shared to start our presentation today. And I get really emotional about this because it's still an ongoing process for me. And it was a very deeply personal meditation for both Josh and myself. But to be able to have the opportunity to share in real time your personal negotiations about rhythm and about movement and everything that's informed it up until that point is it's a really overwhelmingly humbling place to be and a position to be offered. So this moment that we're going to share with you now is a little bit of a synthesis of a lot of what we've been sharing about how those negotiations can manifest, how they can inform and create and produce art, and how they further develop partnerships.
And again, from the beginning on this one? Okay.
It's always really so emotional watching that again, because it was all in real time and there was no pre-planned steps or anything. This wasn't improv-graphical. This was all improvisational for both Josh and myself. So
Indeed, and very clearly and very deeply partnered.
yes, yeah. Whereas I took one of his hits, he took one of mine. And it's just, yeah, to be able to trust not just the visual presentation, but the auditory sound, presentation of the soundscape the atmosphere that we're creating too, was just like, it's really, really amazing to know that you can trust someone like that musically.
Indeed. To bring it back to
to be able to sit with that, like, oh, that must have been how the band members felt. And I remember listening to an interview from Sweets Edison once talking about that, like they understood and valued and appreciated each other because they all understood the value of silence and knew that if someone contributed to that moment, it was going to be something that was enriching and generative for the rest of the group too. So yeah.
I think there were some clear and really beautiful gotcha moments for both of you.
Absolutely. Yeah, absolutely. And Josh is a phenomenal drummer and musician and a dancer as well, for people who might not know him, Josh Colazo. So just again, speaking to this relationship, this partnership internally, dancer / musician, is also a very crucial one that I hope you've been able to suss out throughout our presentation as well. And not just in a dancer and a musician, but in one person, one vessel, one body, the dancer as the musician and the musician as the dancer.
Yes.
Yeah.
Well, on the subject of partnership, I must say that I could not have asked for a better partner through the journey, both of our conversation and sharing today and through the hours we have put in sharing with each other and building this container and building this framework. It has been really an honor and a pleasure to partner with you on the journey of putting this together. And I cannot wait till we can continue this conversation, not only in words, but also in dance.
Yes, that is absolutely my feelings as well. Thank you so much, Christi J. Because I know, as we were saying, I know I've been in the midst of several different things, but to be able to just take this time with you and sit with this material and these things that we both are so deeply passionate about and how they connect and overlap and inform one another. It's been really, really amazing to even look at our words together and be like, did you say that or did I? You know what? It doesn't matter. It's all interconnected and informing each other at the same point now. So I deeply appreciate you so much. And thank you so much for all the work that you've done to make all of this information available again to people, and especially with your forthcoming book.
Thank you. Yes, I wasn't planning to mention it, but I will yes and you, and I will say I have a book coming out next month called Between Beats: The Jazz Tradition and Black Vernacular Dance that I'm honored to be able to participate and contribute in some way, and I really hope people find value in that work, and I hope that it helps keep the conversation going.
And it's another resource to help us continue to dig back.
Indeed.
To bring things forward. So thank you. And thank you again to the National Jazz Museum in Harlem for this opportunity to help our community dig back a little bit more and to see how deep this tradition of partnering actually goes.
Indeed. Thank you all so much. Thank you for joining us.